Hello friends at OVCC. This is John Robinson speaking to you from Wales with Linguae Christi, and I am very happy to have the opportunity to spend a little time with you today. I'd like to share a little bit about my story with you because it is intertwined really with the history of Linguae Christi as an organization. I grew up in a home that was sort of half Christian, half not Christian, and the part that was Christian was a bit more traditional. In other words, to be a good Christian meant to go to church and to be a good person, that sort of thing. And my mother was very faithful, very much a believer in God and in Jesus, went to church and took me to church whenever we could. However, even by her own admission, she would say that at that time she didn't really have a personal faith in Jesus. So I didn't really have a lot of introduction to what you would call the clear gospel message. It wasn't until I was in my teenage years, and I had a very good friend in high school who really influenced me, not so much because he was always kind of bashing me with his Bible and always giving me the plan of salvation, but I could see something different in his life, and I wondered what's going on here. Sort of at the same time, I had a real interest in music and in singing, and I loved to sing the bass part in quartet music. And I remember one evening, and it was October the 31st, 1979. I was 15 years old, and I was reading through hymns, basically finding one with a good bass part, to be honest with you, that I could sing with my friends in a quartet style. And I came across an old hymn called Whosoever Meaneth Me. And it's one that we don't really sing much anymore. But it dawned on me that I needed to do something about my sin problem, but I couldn't do anything about it, so I needed to turn to Jesus. And I did right then and there. Took my little Gideon's New Testament, put it in my shirt pocket, took it to school every day, and just read the New Testament. At that time, we lived pretty far away from our family church and couldn't get there all the time because it was a working farm, and sometimes you just couldn't get away. So I really had just the New Testament, and I was just amazed by Jesus, and just amazed at the fact that he just says, "Follow me," and people just stopped whatever they were doing and followed him. And it sort of instilled in me this sense that it didn't even occur to me that you could say no to God. When God calls, you just say yes. I didn't see many no's in the New Testament. So when I felt the Lord leading me into a call to ministry, I just followed that and said, sure, that's fine with me. And went to college, university, and then began to have a heart for the nations. Even while I was in high school, I had a real heart for persecuted Christians behind the Iron Curtain, and began to write letters of encouragement through them that would be smuggled in, and then I would teach myself enough Russian or Czech or Polish or Hungarian, whatever it was, that I could write a letter of encouragement in those languages. So even then, I'm getting a little bit broader sense of what God's call might be. Long story short, doing summer mission stints and overseas, the Lord made a very clear call to foreign missions in my life, and I followed with that, had an opportunity to serve in Romania for 2 years, and this was during the communist era, so sort of living behind the Iron Curtain a couple of years. Then after everything opened up, went back to Romania full-time with what was known as the Foreign Mission Board at the time. It's now called the International Mission Board with the Southern Baptists. And I served in Romania a term and just really felt that the Lord was closing that door. And long story short, transferred to Wales. And that's where I've been ever since. And so, yeah, that's a bit about my story. And all along the way, very involved in looking at marginalized peoples, particularly linguistic people groups, and even in Romania, looking at people like the Roma people and looking at the possibility of what it would mean for them to have church and evangelism in their heart language, not just Romanian, which is the second language, but their heart language, which is usually some form of Romani. So that's sort of quick view of my story and how that ties in. So, well, I began to tell just a little bit of transferring to Wales. I had been in Romania and become a country coordinator for the IMB while I was in Romania, and developed some skills in really working with strategy and that sort of thing, planning. And so when I felt the Lord was closing the door to Romania, he was opening one to Wales. I served here for many years, became a team leader for all of the Celtic languages, and even then began to ask questions about, well, what about these other similar people groups, and so on and so forth. I can say a little bit more about that in a moment. And I spent nearly 25 years with the IMB, but in 2015, the IMB went through a bit of a financial crisis that forced us to downsize actual field personnel. And they did this in two ways. And one of the ways was with looking at people who were over 50 and served more than 5 years on field to give them a retirement option, to which we had to say yes or no. And I was in that category. And so it was very hard. I thought a lot about it. You know, do I stop what I've been doing? What happens? And during that autumn of 2015, the Lord really gave me what I would call 3 words of wisdom in that point. One was that I should take the retirement. The second was that I should return to Wales, or rather stay in Wales, rather than moving back to the USA. I'm a dual national, British and American, so I didn't have to worry about visas or anything like that. But then he also laid on my heart the vision for Linguae Christi, and that we should really go for it. This was actually something that he had placed on my heart years ago, and I tried very hard kind of to sell this as a possibility in other circles, and just wasn't really getting anywhere. But basically, just like with the Celtic languages that had been my focus for many years, Welsh and Irish Gaelic, Scots Gaelic, Breton, etc., I just began to ask questions about these other linguistic minorities. Well, what about the Basque speakers? Who's reaching Basque speakers in Basque? What about Frisian, Friulian, and on and on and on? And every once in a while I'd hear, maybe somebody was working with the people group, but they were doing it through a trade language and not really reaching the core of the people group. So that was sort of the vision that the Lord brought back to me when it came time to retire. So that's sort of the birth of Linguae Christi. I came back for most of 2016 in the U.S. To do fundraising, and also during that time, Linguae Christi was set up as a legal charity in the United Kingdom, in Wales and England. So a lot of work went into that. So I think that sort of covers that, perhaps, I hope. Well, as you may have guessed, it is the indigenous languages, minority languages, of the European context. Now, why those? Well, majority languages tend to be where most of the attention is placed. For example, French speakers in France, and this is usually done through urban strategy. If you want to reach French speakers, you want to go where you have the largest concentration of them, and that tends to be urban settings. So that's where you would go. That has tended to be the focus for most international missionary organizations, and also many national initiatives tend to be in the cities working with either the majority people group or what I would call non-indigenous minority language groups, such as Turkish speakers in Germany, again, typically urban, or Arabic speakers in France, again, primarily urban. Or South Asian languages in the United Kingdom, things like Punjabi and Bengali, again, primarily in the urban settings. But the more research I did, the more I was finding there are actually a lot of people who speak an indigenous minority language, such as Welsh or Basque or something like that. And when I say this, indigenous minority language, I mean the original language of a place. A lot of people would ask me, well, is what you're doing similar to having what you might have in the States, like a Spanish-speaking church, or a Korean-speaking church, or a Chinese or Romanian? Well, that's not exactly what we're doing. Our work would be more as if we were doing a Navajo language church to reach Navajo-speaking Navajos, or Ojibwe, or Cherokee. These would be the original indigenous language groups of Europe. And the more research I did, the more I found most major international missions agencies are not really doing much with these people groups, at least not in their language. They may try to reach them ethnically through a trade language, but not through their heart language. So this seemed to be a niche, this seemed to be a hole, and the Lord was really leading us as Linguae Christi to focus exclusively on these language groups for that reason. Well, yes, the coronavirus pandemic has certainly made life interesting and quite different for everyone involved in ministry or missions, pretty much everywhere in the world, and we're no exception. Previous to this pandemic, we sort of had two areas of focus for our ministry. One was local ministry, where we're either trying to encourage local believers that in established churches, or we're trying to plant a church. Well, we're actually doing both. Now, in terms of that area of work, I have some colleagues here who basically take the lead with that, and we're having some other people, Lord willing, who will be coming to join us, and I help when I can, but they really take the lead with that sort of local type of ministry in that regard. But then there's the other side of it, which is trying to develop networking and partnerships so that we can expand into other language groups, and that's a lot of what I do. So I do a lot of traveling. I'm meeting with evangelicals in other countries from these language groups, seeing what can be done to work together to start new churches in these languages, and to see how we can come alongside of what's already happening if we need to do that, or sometimes you have situations where we sort of need to take a more catalytic role and really look at developing a team to start ministry moving in that direction. So my part of it is a little bit the broader side of this. I also do have a lot of admin work. We are a registered charity. We do have trustees and meetings and reports and things that we have to do for the government just as part of being an official charity. So I tend to take care of most of those types of things. So those are sort of our activities. Yeah, I think that would be in a nutshell. We do a number of different things, but that would give you, I guess, a glimpse of what we do sort of pre-COVID days. Well, it's affected pretty much everything. COVID has affected pretty much everything. For example, one of our local outreaches that my colleagues run is a children's club after school. It's a Bible club. Well, obviously we can't meet at the moment, and so they've been trying to find ways of having a virtual Bible club, and they have had some success with that. We try to do as much correspondence, as much through Zoom as we can in our networking. That can take us to a certain point, but in a lot of my work with a lot of these people groups, they're very relational. There is really a sort of have to get to know one another, and this requires a lot of personal contact, and obviously that hasn't been possible. So we've been doing a lot of behind-the-scenes work, sort of catching up with a number of things that we've been needing to do, trying to do more initiatives to do recruiting, to cast vision, to get more people praying for us, to get people interested in coming to serve with us, whether it's for summer or for a semester or for a year or two, whatever that happens to be. So we've been using that time to catch up with a number of these things. Simply because it's so easy to get behind. And right now we're quite short-staffed, so all of us are wearing multiple hats. So this has allowed us to work on a few of those things that we haven't really had the time to work on. So in a way, the Lord has redeemed the time for us, and we're grateful for that. Well, I would have to say, in terms of this question of how OVCC can better support Linguae Christi in our work here, I'd have to start with a thank you before I said anything else. You have been and are already doing so much financially to support not just individuals like myself, but different initiatives. All the time, we really do have things that come up that simply require funding. And Sometimes we, in our networking, find people, nationals, who are interested or actually trying to reach their own people in their own language, and a lot of times they just need some resources. In other words, you're looking at people who already have the language, they have the calling, they're trying to spearhead a new initiative, and they just need some things. So these are always areas of support that, in terms of physical support, that would be welcome. But we also, and I'd say this is probably our first priority, we would encourage people to pray for us. As much prayer as you all could do for us and on our behalf before the Father would be much appreciated. And one way to keep in touch is to find us on social media, or download the prayer calendar. We also have a monthly newsletter you can subscribe on the website. This is a great way of getting a monthly notification of the things that are going on with us, how you can pray, how you can be involved. It's sort of integrated with the blog that we have on our website, and also opportunities for service. So this is one way, is just to be informed, to join in, to subscribe, and to receive some of these updates. But that is all primarily for the purpose of prayer. We really need to have people who are praying for us and thinking about us in that way. Also, we hope that there will be opportunities for some of your members to come. One of our big programs is for university students in the summer months. So that's a huge way. If you have any university students in your church or that you know of who would like to spend 3, 4, 6 weeks, something like that, during the summer months, we'd really enjoy having them and look forward to that. So there are all sorts of ways of being involved, even more than you are, and you're quite involved as it is. And I think it all starts with being informed. So I just invite you all to come and do a little digging around on the website, where we're adding things all the time there that will keep you up to date with things that are going on. And let me close just by saying thank you once again for all that you do, not just for me personally, but for us as an organization. And thank you for your prayers. Thank you for your involvement in what God is doing in bringing His good news to some of the least engaged people groups in all of Europe. So thank you for partnering with us. It really means a lot, and may God bless you.